Breaking news, President Trump announced he is ending all trade negotiations with Canada.
U.S. President Donald Trump has announced tonight he is terminating trade talks with Canada.
President Trump says he is ending trade talks with Canada, citing an anti-tariff ad campaign by the province of Ontario. Now, this includes excerpts from a 1987 radio address given by late President Ronald Reagan, in which he says tariffs hurt Americans. Listen.
High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs.
3 minutes ago, Donald Trump looked into a camera and uttered 5 words that just rewired the risk calculus for the entire North American economy. We don't need Canada. This wasn't a throwaway line in a rally speech. It was a definitive statement from the White House podium in response to a question on trade, signaling an end to negotiations and a belief in American invulnerability. The immediate reaction wasn't political, it was financial. In the time it takes to brew a pot of coffee, the Canadian dollar moved, lumber futures shifted, and natural gas contracts in the Midwest began repricing. The Toronto Stock Exchange opened its after-hours session under a wave of sell pressure that bled straight into U.S. equities tied to cross-border supply chains. This is how fast a relationship unravels in the modern era, not in weeks, but in minutes. The trigger was Canada's digital services tax, a policy targeting American tech giants like Google, Amazon, and Meta, projected to generate $7.2 billion for Ottawa. Trump framed it as an attack. When asked if trade talks would continue, his answer was a blunt termination. Talks were over, and Canada would come crawling back. But what happened next shattered the old script of U.S.-Canada relations. Within 40 minutes, Prime Minister Mark Carney issued a formal written statement. No press conference, no frantic diplomacy, just cold, clear text. And the tone was unprecedented for a Canadian leader addressing an American president. Canada is not a supplicant, Carney stated. And Canada is a sovereign nation with leverage that this administration has consistently failed to understand. He then announced Canada would accelerate the implementation of the digital services tax and hinted at new retaliatory measures within the week. This is a historic pivot. For decades, the Canadian playbook was de-escalation. The goal was always to calm the waters, to reassure Washington, to be the reasonable neighbor. Carney's response was the opposite: rapid, public escalation. He matched the aggression and raised the stakes. This immediate face-off lays bare the core, dangerous question now hanging over the continent. Has the United States, in its conviction of unmatched power, fundamentally misjudged who holds the real leverage in this relationship? The financial markets, twitching within minutes of Trump's statement, seem to think so. They are pricing in a reality that political rhetoric denies. These two economies are not just connected, they are conjoined. To understand why this moment is so explosive, you have to look past the political theater and into the anatomy of interdependence. The "we don't need them" claim isn't just arrogant. It challenges the operational reality of American industry, energy security, and consumer prices. It's a statement that, if acted upon, would trigger a supply shock the United States is uniquely unprepared to handle. But before we dissect that vulnerability, the pipelines, the refineries, the grid, we need to understand the new rules of engagement Carney just established. Canada is no longer playing for sympathy, it's playing for leverage. And the opening move was to call the bluff, publicly and without hesitation. The game has changed, and the next move is on the board. To grasp the sheer scale of the American miscalculation, you need to move beyond the political rhetoric and into the physical infrastructure of national survival. Trump's "we don't need them" declaration isn't just a negotiating position, it's a denial of engineering and economic reality. Let's examine the 3 pillars of this reality that make the statement so dangerously disconnected. First, the refinery lock-in. Every day, 4.1 million barrels of Canadian crude oil flow into the United States, constituting 63% of all U.S. crude imports. This isn't a commodity swap. This is a specialized feedstock relationship. Refineries across the Midwest and Gulf Coast are not generic. They are billion-dollar machines engineered to process heavy, sour crude from the Canadian oil sands. Retooling them to run on light, Sweet crude from Saudi Arabia or West Africa is not a switch you flip. It's a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar capital project that would reduce capacity, spike costs, and create immediate fuel shortages. The idea that other suppliers can replace this volume overnight is a fantasy. Venezuela is a shell, Mexico is declining, and Middle Eastern oil arrives by tanker weeks later, traversing geopolitical choke points. Canadian oil arrives by pipeline, a secure land-based umbilical cord. Severing it isn't a policy choice. It's an act of economic self-sabotage. Second, the invisible lifelines, natural gas and electricity. The numbers here are even more stark. Canada supplies 98% of U.S. natural gas imports. This isn't a marginal top-up. For states like Michigan, Minnesota, and New England, it is the difference between heated homes and a winter crisis. The pipeline network is a necessity, not a luxury, built because U.S. domestic supply in those regions cannot meet peak demand. Then there's the grid. Canada provides 82% of U.S. electricity imports. Hydroelectric power from Quebec and Manitoba is not a bonus for New York and Michigan. It is a critical component of baseload stability, preventing brownouts during summer heat waves and winter deep freezes. This isn't trade, it's integrated infrastructure. You can't wish it away with a speech. Third, the manufacturing mesh. Beyond energy, the economies are woven together at the component level. Nearly half of all trade is in intermediate goods, parts, steel, aluminum, chemicals that cross the border multiple times. The auto industry is the prime example. A vehicle's parts may cross the border 8 times before final assembly. This Made in North America system was optimized over 30 years for efficiency and cost. The 25% tariffs already in place have begun to fray this mesh, causing price spikes in steel, aluminum, and auto parts. Those costs have already started flowing downstream to American consumers. Dismantling the mesh doesn't hurt Canada. It inflates the cost of every car, appliance, and building made in the United States. Trump's statement assumes a world of simple, replaceable transactions. But the U.S.-Canada relationship is not a series of transactions. It is a deep, structural codependence. The U.S. doesn't just buy stuff from Canada. It relies on Canada as a geographic extension of its own industrial and energy base. This brings us to the brilliant coldness of Carney's response. By escalating immediately, accelerating the digital tax, promising more retaliation, he is testing the foundational premise of Trump's bluff. He is forcing the United States to confront a simple question. Are you willing to bear the tangible, inflationary, and disruptive cost of your own rhetoric? The markets reacted in minutes because they understand this calculus. They know that "we don't need them" is a political sentiment, not an operational fact. They are pricing in the rising risk of a supply shock that U.S. industry is physically unable to absorb quickly. The broader pattern here is the TACO strategy in its most reckless form, Trump's penchant for maximalist threats designed to create chaos and force capitulation. But this time, the target is not a distant rival. It's the foundation of his own nation's cost of living and energy security. The chicken out part of the equation becomes astronomically more expensive when you're threatening to blow up your own basement. Carney's move exploits this flaw perfectly. He is not calling for peace. He is demonstrating, in real time, that Canada has the capacity to make the pain of this strategy mutual, immediate, and severe. By moving faster and more decisively than expected, he shifts the psychological burden. The question is no longer, how much will Canada hurt? It's, how much pain is Washington willing to inflict on its own citizens to prove a point? This sets the stage for the final, decisive phase, the domestic political blowback within the United States. Because the first people to call the White House after Trump's statement weren't diplomats. They were the CEOs of refining companies, auto manufacturers, and Midwestern utility boards. And their question was simple: what is your plan to keep our operations running? The silence in response to that question will echo louder than any 5-word slogan. The ultimate cost of this 5-word doctrine will not be measured in diplomatic cables, but in kitchen table economics across the American Midwest and the political consequences that follow. The immediate retaliation promised by Carney is not an abstraction. It's a targeted strike at political pressure points. Accelerating the digital services tax hits a powerful U.S. lobby, Silicon Valley, directly in its revenue stream. The hinted additional measures will almost certainly target precision sectors where U.S. exporters have dominant market share in Canada and where American jobs are concentrated. Agriculture from swing states, machinery from the industrial heartland, chemicals from the Gulf Coast. This is how modern economic statecraft works. It's not about broad, blunt pain. It's about applying focused, politically costly pressure to the adversary's domestic constituencies. It forces the lobbyists for corn growers, airplane manufacturers, and tech giants to march into congressional offices and demand a de-escalation their own president started. This is the inescapable feedback loop Trump's strategy has ignored. In a deeply integrated economy, aggressive coercion creates immediate blowback that lands on the doorstep of the very voters and industries you champion. The refinery executive in Texas, the auto parts supplier in Ohio, the wheat farmer in Kansas, they become unwitting casualties of a trade war with their largest, closest customer. Carney's sovereign, defiant stance also fundamentally alters the global perception of this conflict. For allies in Europe and Asia watching, the lesson is stark. The United States is willing to weaponize interdependence even with its most integrated partner. This does not make America look strong. It makes it look unpredictable and unreliable. It accelerates the quiet, global trend of de-risking from the United States. If Canada, with its shared border, culture, and supply chains, is not safe, then no one is. This perception will drive investment away from U.S.-centric supply chains for a generation. For Canada, the path is one of painful but purposeful realignment. Carney's government is betting that the short-term shock of a frayed U.S. relationship is preferable to the long-term vulnerability of total dependence. The push to diversify trade to Europe and Asia, to build the energy export terminals, to subsidize domestic supply chains, all of it gains urgent political oxygen from moments like this. The crisis is being used to forge a new national consensus. Independence is worth the cost. The most likely short-term outcome is a grudging, unglamorous retreat. The White House, confronted with panicked industry calls and slipping polls in affected states, will slowly walk back the rhetoric. Talks will quietly resume. There will be no grand apology, but a series of small technical concessions designed to lower the temperature. Trump will claim his toughness forced Canada to the table. Carney will have solidified his reputation as a leader who doesn't fold. But the structural damage will be permanent. Trust, once burned out of an economic relationship, is not rebuilt with a press release. Every boardroom on both sides of the border will now factor in political risk as a permanent cost of doing business. Investment decisions will shift. The seamless, just-in-time integration that made North America competitive will be replaced by costlier, duplicate systems designed for resilience over efficiency. Inflation will find a stubborn foothold. In the end, the 5 words, "We don't need Canada," will be remembered not as a show of strength, but as a costly revelation of ignorance. They revealed a failure to understand that true power in the modern world isn't just about whose market is bigger. It's about whose supply chains are resilient, whose energy base is secure, and whose alliances are built on mutual benefit, not fear. The statement was meant to project invulnerability. Instead, it highlighted profound vulnerability. It showed that the American economy is not an island, but the central node in a network it can sever only at tremendous self-inflicted cost. The final lesson is for history. Nations that mistake deep interdependence for weakness often discover, too late, that they have been attacking the foundations of their own prosperity. The relationship may be patched up, but it will be thinner, more fragile, and more expensive for everyone. The era of taking the world's longest, most successful economic partnership for granted ended the moment the market data started moving in real time. For clear, fact-driven analysis of how geopolitical shifts impact your economy and security, subscribe to Canada Today. Like this video, share it, and let us know in the comments. Can this relationship ever go back to normal? Or has a new, more contentious normal just been born?